you might want to do things to the audio that'll make it sound better. So that's what these effects here are for. Look at that. Okay, so you click that effects button, this whole thing comes up, and you add an effect. So let's see, let's look for problems in this. Okay, there's this, if I zoom in, you can see that there's like this vibration going out throughout the entire thing, and that sounds awful. So I use what's called a gate, and I'll click re-gate. That's the name of the gate in this. Oh, here's a cool thing for playback. You can just play back a section by dragging this, and you'll create these, and you can move these around, and it'll see right now if I just play this, and tomorrow at 2:30, that won't do anything. But when I press this button or hit the R key, it'll loop this section. Tomorrow at it'll loop that section forever until you hit spacebar again or enter. You can also hit enter to pause exactly where you stop. Spacebar is actually stop, enters, and pause. Okay, so anyway, we've got this clip. We want to use the gate to get rid of this noise. And that did it. I don't know if you could hear that. Maybe you could, but that should have fixed it. Also, let's say hypothetically, people who you can contact at say hypothetically my voice was really bassy. Here, let me make some audio that's really bassy. Remember, I'll arm to record again and then hit Control R. See, that's probably too bassy, right? Yeah, so we can use something called EQ, equalization. You know, have you ever seen those sliders on the radio? And that's what these are. These are a bunch of sliders. See, look at that. That's a bunch of bass frequencies. I'm going to turn this level down so we can just see it and not hear it over my voice. See, look at that. Too many bass. So we can fix the sound by moving that down. And look, it went down a little. It's not as bassy. That's great. So these are just examples. I might do another video explaining more of these effects in depth, but that's basically how you add effects. Also, you can delete things by clicking on them and hitting delete. That's probably an important thing I should have mentioned. Anyway, let's say this is our whole PSA, and we edited it around. We rearranged all the parts we needed, and it's sounding good. You know, we're listening through it, and we think that sounds like something I'd hear on the radio. Now we can add some music. So we do that by adding another track. I should probably zoom out because I don't need to see this audio that big. And then I use home and end keys to go to the beginning, but you could also just click. And I use the insert key on my keyboard to insert a song. Now you can also use the insert menu and hit media file. So I have a library of music that I made that you can use in PSAs. So this is a song. There's an event happening on... Yeah, it sounds appropriate for PSAs, you know, make sure it's in the public domain or whatever, and if you need any help, you can ask me about that, where to find songs, where to make songs. So we have this music, doesn't fit in 30 seconds, that's okay, we can just end it there. Sometimes, let's say I was making a minute-long PSA. Ooh, it's a little longer than a minute. And there's just like a little bit that would be missing. So I would use Alt and drag this over, and it stretches. It speeds it up slightly, but that's not really noticeable if you only speed it up a little bit. So that sounds fine. Anyway, but we're not even doing a minute-long PSA. We're doing a 30-second-long PSA. Actually, it lines up perfectly with 30 seconds too, which is fun. Anyway, so make sure you split the audio, or just shorten it with this to make sure that nothing goes past the length that you want it to. If this is a minute, if this is 30 seconds, don't put anything past there. Now, I always just do that. I fade them out just a little bit just to make absolutely certain that there's no clicks at the beginning of the PSA. There's an event happening on... Okay, that music's too loud. How do we fix that? So usually I actually start the PSA with like a second of music and then I start talking, so it looks like that. There's an event. So what if we want to have the music full volume at the beginning and then kind of lower it down a little later. By the way, these change the volume of the music or of the track throughout the whole thing. So here on Tomorrow, here the music is very quiet and we can hear the voice clearly. But what about the beginning here? There's too quiet to even hear. So here's what we do. We click on this and we press the V button on our keyboard. Now we shift click here and then we shift click here, and this is making little points. I hope you can see that on the recording. Anyway, you have these little points. This is called an envelope. So you can drag this. So what I'm doing here is I made 2 points. So at the beginning, full volume, then it goes here and it drops down a little bit. There's an event happening on so doesn't that sound great? Then at the very end, we can move it back up. And this number, the decibels number, full volume is 0. And then quieter is negative. And there we go. So let's listen. There's an event happening on tomorrow. And listen to that. At the beginning, you could hear the music totally clearly. And then in the middle, you can hear the person totally clearly. And then at the end, the music comes back. Although the end doesn't really matter that much. I mean, it's ending anyway. So like, I don't know how useful that is. But yeah, shift click to add these little points. Drag them around. You want to make sure that this line is flat. One way you can ensure that is right-clicking on the point at the beginning of the line, say set point shape, and call it square, and that will make it exactly flat. Sometimes you can just eyeball it. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, let's click on, this is our master, so let's talk about mixing. Let's play it all the way through. Oh, terrible. See, we've got red. We've got clipping on the master. That's awful. So what we're going to do is we're just going to reduce the volume. There's still clipping. And I think it's this that's clipping. The music. All right, let's try again. There's an event happening on Great. Now it's not clipping. Okay, so now what I do at this point, this whole thing should be like audible at the volume that you use your computer at. There's an event. You shouldn't have to turn it up, right? And if you have to turn it up, then you can make it louder with the faders. You have to turn it, and you should turn it down if it's clipping. All right, now we can make a new track that will contain both of these tracks. It's called a folder. You do that by making a track, dragging it above, and clicking on this little folder thing, and then you can click it again to make it not a folder anymore. And you do this, so now the effects here affect both of these tracks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the effects, and I'm going to use the secret weapon. It's called a master limiter. I'm going to type in master limiter, and look, there it is, master limiter. That'll make the whole thing a good volume, and it'll sound kind of loud, but like not too loud. There's an event happening on tomorrow at 2:30. If my audio is really quiet to start with, I'll drag this lower, and if it's really loud to start with, I'll drag it higher. Usually you can keep it at 3 if it sounds okay before you add this effect. Tomorrow. So what this effect does is it makes sure that the audio never clips, and it makes sure that it's also loud enough if it's too quiet. So now we've got a PSA, right? We have -0.1 here. Leave that setting there because -0.1 dB is what we use, and this does that by default. So now if we play the whole thing, there's an event happening on tomorrow at 2:30. It's being hosted by these people. Obviously, a real PSA wouldn't sound like this, but you would write out a real PSA and record that and not just stretch things around. WEBSITE.com. You're listening to WHUS Stores. All right, that sounds good. And look here, you can look at these numbers. These numbers tell you what the loudest part was, and it says -0.1, which is what we want. So now we have a whole PSA. What we're going to do is called rendering. We go File and hit Render, or Control-Alt-R. Now we want the master mix and the entire project. If we wanted to, we could just select that and then render just the time selection, but we're just going to do entire project because it's exactly 30 seconds long. Then very importantly, we're going to uncheck this tail thing because we do not want a second of silence at the end for no reason. Now let's see, we'll browse for file, and we want to save it with this naming scheme. First, PSA, all caps. Then the date that the event happens on, which is, I don't know, May 32nd, 2021. And then what the event is. And then we want to say, is there a station ID in the audio or is there not? In this case, there is. So I write station ID included. That means that the station ID is included in the audio. And we'll hit save. But wait a minute. We have to make sure this is right. So we can use WAV files, but we don't have to. We can use MP3s because those are smaller and easier to work with. So what we're going to do is make sure that this is constant bitrate. We absolutely need to make sure that it's constant bitrate. And we can have the bitrate all the way up at 320 because this is a 30-second sound file. It's not going to be that big, so we can go all the way up to 320 kilobits per second. And now we render one file. And it'll go through that. And we can say show an explorer. And it will point you to the file that you just made. Look at that. It starts playing. And so then you send that file to where you need to send it to. And that's how you make a PSA in Reaper.